So what does this mean for all of us come November? Well, to answer just that, with me now is, to get to the bottom of it, is Megan Carpentier, executive producer or director from The Raw Story. Hi there, Megan. So first question, I show my ID several times a day to pay for my groceries, to get to a bar, to get into certain buildings. So what's wrong with showing your ID when you're voting? I mean, after all, it is a sacred American right.
Well, I think that's the difference. It isn't a right to go to a bar. It isn't a right necessarily to buy groceries, unfortunately. It is, however, one of the fundamental rights of this country to vote. And unfortunately, when you look at some of these voter ID laws, it isn't as easy to get an ID as you might expect because, of course, some people can't get driver's licenses easy. You have to go to the other side of town, to 2 towns away. You have to have transportation. You have to have time off of work. You have to go during business hours. Maybe you can't get the time off because of the job you had, or you can't afford to take the time off. And then, of course, if you look at some of the things you need to do to get an ID, you have to have a Social Security card. If you don't have a Social Security card, what do you need to do to get a Social Security card? You need to have ID. Or you need a passport, for which you need a Social Security card, for which you need ID to get in the first place. And it's this self-reinforcing cycle that once you don't have one, it's very difficult to get one.
And it sounds like what you're saying is that right now it's taking so much time in order to get them. But I also know that you're opposed to this happening before the 2012 elections. Would you support the measure that happened before the 2016 elections to give people that extra time that they need to be able to provide that paperwork?
Well, I think the difficulty is it's not just the ones like people don't have ID right now. If you look at travel to Mexico or travel to Canada, people's inabilities to get passports or to qualify to get passports or to take the time and the effort and the expense to get passports has actually negatively impacted their ability to go to Canada or to go to Mexico, even in border towns. So it isn't just a one-time thing. This one time people don't happen to have IDs. This is an ongoing problem when IDs are A, costly, and B, time-consuming to get. You know, are you going to pass a law in Pennsylvania that everybody has to give their employees 1 day off a year to go get ID? Or are you just going to assume, because most of us in positions like yours and mine can take a day off, that everybody has that ability when it's actually not the case?
So are you saying that you don't think that in the next 5 years it would be up until the 2016 elections that they'd be able to get everything together?
I don't think that everybody can get everything. This is the fundamental franchise. I mean, this is the thing on which our country was founded, and we're putting roadblocks in place because we're concerned about something less than 500 people in the last 10 years fraudulently casting a ballot. And in the meantime, we're going to throw tens of thousands of people off of their rolls in various states and deny them their fundamental franchise because of those 400. It'd be like saying, okay, we're really concerned about mugging, thus we're going to institute a curfew across society as soon as sundown and before sunrise. It's an overreaction to what's a relatively small problem that really has the potential to impact the most poor people, the elderly, minorities in this country that don't actually have what we think is something really easy, but if you think about it, isn't to get.
And Megan, it looks like your numbers are a little bit different than mine, but one newspaper in Minnesota did actually do a study to track voter ID fraud. They found 10 cases over the last decade. That's out of 146 million votes. That many cases were actually conclusively voter ID fraud. So just to put that in perspective, that's 1 out of 15 million prospective voters. So let's take a look at why the Republicans or why the Democrats would want or oppose that. Can you talk about that?
Well, I think what you have is you have a small group like True the Vote, like some of the Tea Party folks, putting into action these organizations, these groups that are trying to get voter ID laws passed. And what they've said is they think, you know, immigrants are voting, they think people are voting that shouldn't be voting. They are convinced that there are people voting in multiple jurisdictions and that the government isn't paying enough attention. And in order to kind of throw a bone to some of these activist groups, you have these voter ID laws passed, which of course, you know, if you look from a political perspective, have the likelihood of throwing out elderly voters, minority voters, poor voters, which tend to vote Democratic. So you have kind of a 2-for-1. You get to pacify an activist wing of the Republican Party, and B, you get to disenfranchise people that are less likely to vote for you.
Megan, it seems like there's a lot to be discussed before the 2012 elections, even more to be discussed before the 2016 elections. We're going to have to wait to see how this plays out. As Christine mentioned in her story just a little bit ago, we're also looking at Ohio and their extended voting hours. So it kind of seems like right now that the elections are very much up in the air and coming down to a bunch of technicalities. Megan Carpentier, executive director from the Raw Story, thank you so much for joining us.